Muscular CEO only dated models until his new divorced nanny walked into his office and stole his. Mason Cole had built his empire on three simple rules: no carbs after 6, no children in his personal space, and absolutely no women without runway contracts. At 34, he made those rules work flawlessly. His Miami penthouse was a monument to control. White leather furniture that showed every imperfection, glass tables that reflected his success, and not a single item out of place. What happens when a billionaire who collects beautiful women meets the one woman who refuses to be collected? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She walked into his glass tower wearing thrift store heels and carrying a secret worth more than his penthouse. But Mason Cole only saw what he wanted to see: a plain woman who wouldn't tempt him. What happens when a billionaire who collects beautiful women meets the one woman who refuses to be collected? Have you ever been underestimated because someone judged your worth by your appearance? This is about a man who thought he knew exactly what he wanted, until reality shattered every rule he lived by. Stay with me to discover how the most powerful attraction isn't always the most obvious one. The elevator doors open to reveal Mason's domain, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay, where million-dollar yachts dotted the water like toys. Behind his desk, framed photos of leggy blondes smiled with practiced perfection, each one a testament to his taste for the untouchable. Mason Cole had built his empire on three simple rules: no carbs after 6, no children in his personal space, and absolutely no women without runway contracts. At 34, he made those rules work flawlessly. His Miami penthouse was a monument to control. White leather furniture that showed every imperfection, glass tables that reflected his success, and not a single item out of place. The woman standing in his reception area violated every principle he lived by. Lena Carter smoothed her secondhand blazer and checked her watch. The interview was scheduled for 3 o'clock, and she'd arrived 15 minutes early, not eager, just prepared. Her resume sat in a folder that had seen better days, but the credentials inside were solid. 5 years of nanny experience, spotless references, and a quiet desperation she hoped didn't show in her eyes. "Mr. Cole will see you now," his assistant announced. Mason looked up from his computer as she entered. His first thought was clinical. Average height, brown hair pulled back sensibly, no makeup to speak of. His second thought surprised him. She moved like someone comfortable in her own skin, despite the obvious mismatch between her clothes and his world. "Ms. Carter." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I understand you're interested in the nanny position." "I am." Her voice was steady, professional. "I've read the job description. Your nephew needs someone reliable." Tommy, 8 years old, brilliant, and completely abandoned by every supermodel Mason had hired to watch him. The kid had been living with Mason for 6 months since his sister's accident, and neither of them was adjusting well. "Tommy is challenging," Mason admitted. "He doesn't warm up to strangers easily. Most children don't trust adults who see them as inconveniences," Lena replied without missing a beat. Mason's eyebrows rose. No one spoke to him that directly, especially not job candidates. "And you think I see my nephew as an inconvenience? I think you see him as a problem to be solved rather than a child to be understood." She leaned back slightly, unfazed by his sharp look. "The question is whether you want someone who'll manage him or someone who'll actually care about him." From the outer office came the sound of a child crying, high-pitched, desperate wails that made Mason's jaw tighten. Another nanny quitting, probably. That made for this month. Lena was on her feet before Mason could react. She walked to the door, separating his office from the reception area, and knelt down at Tommy's eye level. The boy was red-faced, tears streaming, while a tall blonde in designer heels stood nearby looking disgusted. "He just started screaming," the woman said. "I can't deal with this behavior. I'm not a babysitter." "Hey there," Lena said softly to Tommy. "That sounds like a really big feeling. Want to tell me about it?" Tommy hiccuped, studying her face. "She said I was being a brat because I asked for my mom." "Missing your mom isn't bratty," Lena said, settling cross-legged on the floor despite her dress pants. "It's human. I bet she was really special. Mason watched from his doorway as Tommy's sobs slowed. In 5 minutes, this woman in discount clothes had accomplished what 3 supermodels couldn't manage in weeks. I could tell you about her, Tommy whispered. I'd like that very much. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone's first impression? Tell me in the comments about a time someone surprised you. As she knelt to comfort his crying nephew, the same child 3 supermodels had dismissed as too needy, Mason felt something crack in his chest. It wasn't desire, it was recognition, and that terrified him more than any boardroom battle ever had. For 5 years, no woman had lasted more than 3 dates with Mason Cole. Lena wasn't even trying to date him, which made her the most dangerous woman he'd ever met. Lena arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying a canvas bag that had seen better years and a coffee cup from the deli downstairs. Mason watched through his security cameras as she let herself into the penthouse, moving through his sterile spaces like she belonged there. Not because of privilege, but because comfort had nothing to do with price tags. Tommy appeared from his bedroom, still in pajamas, dragging a stuffed elephant that Mason had never seen before. Lena, the boy launched himself at her legs. Good morning, sunshine. She ruffled his hair. Ready for breakfast? Mason continued watching as she opened his restaurant-quality kitchen and began making pancakes from scratch. Not the protein smoothies his previous nannies had pushed, or the expensive organic cereals. Real pancakes, with Tommy standing on a step stool beside her, cracking eggs and giggling when shells fell into the bowl. When had his nephew started laughing again? Uncle Mason's watching us, Tommy announced, waving at the camera in the corner. Lena glanced up, meeting the lens directly. Her smile was polite, professional, and completely unimpressed by his surveillance. Mason found himself leaving his office earlier than usual. Smells good in here, he said, loosening his tie as he entered the kitchen. Tommy's making breakfast, Lena replied, not turning from the stove. He's quite the chef. I added extra chocolate chips, Tommy announced proudly. Chocolate for breakfast? Mason asked. Happiness for breakfast, Lena corrected. The chocolate is just the delivery method. She flipped a pancake with practiced ease, and Mason noticed the way her worn jeans hugged her hips. The observation came uninvited and unwelcome. He didn't notice women like her. He didn't date women who wore secondhand clothes and made their own coffee. Except he was noticing the graceful way she moved, the curve of her waist when she reached for plates, the way she smelled like vanilla and something uniquely hers. Most women want to impress me, Mason said, leaning against the counter. You barely look at me. Lena finally turned, spatula in hand, and gave him her full attention. Maybe that's why Tommy trusts me and fears you. The words hit like a physical blow. He doesn't fear me. He tenses up every time you walk in a room. He apologizes for normal kid behavior. He's 8 years old, and he's trying to be perfect for you. She set a plate in front of Tommy, whose eyes had gone wide at the adult conversation. Kids don't need perfect adults, Mr. Cole. They need present ones. Mason stared at her. In his world, people agreed with him, flattered him, or at minimum tried not to challenge him directly. This woman was doing none of those things. I provide for him, Mason said defensively. You house him, Lena corrected. There's a difference. Tommy looked between them nervously. Are you fighting? No, sweetie, Lena said immediately, her voice gentle again. Adults sometimes need to talk about important things. Your uncle loves you very much. She looked at Mason as she said it, and he realized she was giving him an opening to prove her right. I do, Mason said, the words feeling rusty in his mouth. I love you, Tommy. The boy's face lit up like Christmas morning. What's more attractive? Someone trying to impress you, or someone who challenges you to be better? Share your thoughts below. That night, Mason stood at his bedroom window, watching Lena's beat-up Honda disappear into traffic. He pulled out his phone to run a background check, standard procedure for all employees. But as his finger hovered over send, he hesitated. Some secrets, he realized, were more powerful when they chose to reveal themselves. She answered his personal questions with professional smiles, deflected his compliments with practiced ease, and somehow made Mason Cole, a man who owned half of Miami, feel like he was the one being interviewed. 3 weeks into Lena's employment, Mason's routine had shifted in ways he didn't want to examine. He found himself working from home more often, taking conference calls from his kitchen just to hear her voice in the background as she helped Tommy with homework. "She's really smart," Tommy told him one evening as Lena gathered her things to leave. "She knows about numbers and business stuff. She helped me with my math and explained it better than my teacher." Mason looked up from his laptop. "What kind of business stuff?" "Investment things. She said stocks are like buying tiny pieces of companies." Tommy shrugged, but she doesn't want to talk about her old job. She gets sad eyes. After Tommy went to bed, Mason found himself studying Lena more carefully. The way she automatically checked financial news on her phone. How she corrected his accountant's math during a brief conversation about household expenses. Small things that didn't fit the narrative of a career nanny. The charity gala invitation sat on his desk, Miami's annual fundraiser for children's hospitals. He usually attended with whatever model was currently warming his bed, but none of his recent connections seemed appropriate. "I have to go to a work thing Saturday night," he told Lena Friday morning. "Can you stay late with Tommy?" "Of course." She was making Tommy's lunch, moving efficiently through his kitchen like she'd been there for years instead of weeks. Actually, Mason heard himself say, "Would you like to come with me? It's a charity event. Tommy could come too. They have activities for kids." Lena's hands stilled on the sandwich she was making. "Mr. Cole, I don't think that's appropriate." "It's not a date," he said quickly. "It's exposure for Tommy. He should learn about philanthropy." She turned to face him, those dark eyes seeing right through his excuse. "And you need a date who won't embarrass you?" "I need someone who actually cares about the cause instead of using it as a photo opportunity." The honesty in his voice seemed to surprise them both. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear," she said finally. "That's not a problem." Mason pulled out his phone. "I know people." Saturday evening, Lena emerged from the guest room wearing a simple black dress that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Mason's stylist had outdone herself. The dress was elegant without being flashy, sophisticated without trying too hard. But it was Lena inside the dress that stopped Mason's breath. She moved with quiet confidence, her hair swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. When she smiled at Tommy's compliments, she was luminous. The gala was exactly what Mason expected. Miami's elite pretending charity work was about more than tax write-offs and social media posts. But watching Lena interact with the other guests was educational. She asked thoughtful questions about the hospital's programs, listened to the donor stories, and somehow made everyone feel heard. "She's lovely," said Patricia Henley, one of Miami's biggest philanthropists. "Where did you find her?" "She found me," Mason replied, realizing how true that was. During dinner, disaster struck. Tommy spilled grape juice across his white shirt, and tears immediately followed. Before Mason could react, Lena had whisked the boy to the bathroom. Mason followed, finding them in the hallway outside the restrooms. Lena had somehow transformed the stain into a galaxy of stars using her phone's flashlight and creative storytelling. "See? Now you're wearing the universe," she said, making Tommy giggle. She stood to find Mason watching them, and for a moment, neither spoke. The hallway was dimly lit, crowded with other guests, but Mason felt like they were alone. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing him. Really seeing him." Lena's cheeks flushed pink. "He's easy to see once you look." Have you ever found yourself attracted to someone who was completely wrong for you on paper? What made them irresistible? Comment below. The next morning, Mason found a note on his coffee maker. Tommy had nightmares. He stayed over. Nothing happened, don't worry. But as he crumpled the paper, one word echoed in his mind. She'd written nothing happened, like she'd been thinking about what could have. Mason thought he was eavesdropping on a desperate woman begging for money. Instead, he overheard Lena Carter turning down more wealth than most people see in a lifetime, and his entire world shifted. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Mason was reviewing contracts in his home office. Lena was in the kitchen, voice low but urgent enough to carry through the penthouse's open layout. "I don't care if it's 40 million or 400 million, David. I told you, I won't take blood money." Mason's pen stopped moving across the page. "My son and I will be fine. Lena continued. Some things matter more than financial security, like being able to look at yourself in the mirror. So, Mason pressed himself against the kitchen wall, coffee forgotten in his hand as Lena's voice carried through the penthouse. Each word she spoke rewrote everything he thought he knew about her. Richard can keep his guilt money. I'd rather work 3 jobs than owe him anything. Her laugh was bitter. What do you mean, dangerous? David, he already destroyed my career and reputation. What else can he take? A pause. Mason held his breath. My location? Lena's voice sharpened. How would he know where I am? I've been careful. Mason's blood chilled. Someone was looking for her. Someone with enough money to hire investigators. Enough power to destroy careers. I understand the risks, Lena said firmly. But I won't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder for a man who thinks he owns me because we shared a bank account. Some cages are golden, David. They're still cages. The call ended, and Mason heard her footsteps approaching. He quickly returned to his desk, but his mind was racing. $40 million. An ex-husband with power and vindictive tendencies. A son she'd never mentioned. Everything he'd assumed about Lena Carter was wrong. She appeared in his doorway, her professional mask perfectly in place. Mr. Cole, I'm taking Tommy to the park. We'll be back by lunch. Lena, the word stopped her. Is everything all right? For just a moment, her composure cracked. He saw fear flicker across her features before she smoothed it away. Everything's fine, she said. Just family business. But as she turned to leave, Mason caught her arm gently. If you need help, I don't need help. The words came out sharper than intended. I'm sorry. I handle my own problems. What if you didn't have to? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Some problems can't be solved with money, Lena said quietly. And some people can't be bought. After she left with Tommy, Mason sat at his desk staring at his computer screen. $40 million. What kind of man lets his ex-wife walk away from that kind of money? And what kind of woman refuses it? His fingers hovered over the keyboard. One search would give him answers. Lena Carter, Miami, or maybe Lena Blackstone, if she'd taken her ex-husband's name. He could know everything about her past within an hour. Instead, he closed the laptop. When they returned from the park, Tommy ran straight to his room to play with new action figures Lena had bought him. She stood in the foyer, keys in hand, ready to leave for the day. Lena, Mason said, how long have you been running? She froze, her back to him. When she turned around, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Running implies I had somewhere to go, she said. I prefer to think of it as making a strategic retreat. From your ex-husband, from a man who confused ownership with love. She set her keys on the hallway table, a gesture of surrender. You heard the call. Some of it. Would you walk away from financial security to protect your values? What's the most you've sacrificed for your principles? Share your story. As Lena stood frozen in his kitchen doorway, Mason saw her properly for the first time. Not as a nanny who needed his job, but as a woman who'd chosen his protection over a billionaire ex-husband's revenge. How long? He asked quietly. Have you been running? She'd spent 2 years hiding from a man who could destroy careers with a phone call. Until the day she realized her new boss might be powerful enough to protect her, if she was brave enough to trust him. They sat on his terrace as Miami's skyline glittered below, the city lights reflecting in her eyes like fallen stars. For the first time since she'd arrived, Lena looked small, not weak, but human-sized against the magnitude of her secrets. His name is Richard Blackstone, she said finally, the words coming slowly like blood from a wound. We were married for 8 years. I thought it was love. Turns out it was acquisition. Mason recognized the name immediately. Richard Blackstone, pharmaceutical billionaire, known for hostile takeovers and vindictive business practices. They'd circled each other in Miami's financial circles for years, like sharks testing territorial waters. Investment banking, Lena continued, answering his unspoken question about her expertise with numbers. I specialized in pharmaceutical mergers. That's how we met. He was acquiring my client's company. I thought he was charming. What changed? Lena's laugh held no humor. I got pregnant. Suddenly, the dynamic wife became a liability. Richard doesn't like sharing attention. even with his own children. She wrapped her arms around herself. When I miscarried, he said it was probably for the best. That children would interfere with our lifestyle. Mason's hands clenched on his whiskey glass. I tried to leave then, but he made it clear that would be problematic. My clients started dropping me. My job recommendations were mysteriously negative. I realized that my entire professional life existed at his discretion. So you stayed. I stayed and planned. Took a year to carefully extract myself from his control without triggering his attention. Filed for divorce from a lawyer 3 states away. Moved to Miami under my maiden name. She looked at him directly. I thought I was free. But he found you. He always finds me. Richard doesn't like losing, especially to someone he considers his property. She took a shaky breath. The $40 million David mentioned? That's my divorce settlement. Richard's way of keeping me quiet about some things I learned during our marriage. What kind of things? Lena's smile was sharp, the kind that get pharmaceutical executives federal prison sentences. Before Mason could respond, the sound of crying came from inside the penthouse. Tommy, having another nightmare about his mother. They both stood, but Mason's hand on her arm stopped her. Let me, he said. You've done enough caregiving today. But as he turned toward the house, Lena's fingers caught his wrist. Mason. His name on her lips sounded different in the darkness. Why are you being so kind to me? He looked down at her hand on his skin, at the way the city lights played across her upturned face. Maybe because kindness looks good on you. The space between them seemed to shrink. Mason's thumb traced her jawline as she spoke, his touch gentle enough to stop her trembling. You're safe here, he murmured, and when she looked up, her lips were so close he could taste her breath. The sound of Tommy crying shattered the moment, but not the promise in his eyes. Inside, they found Tommy sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face. I dreamed about Mom again, he whispered. She was calling for me, but I couldn't find her. Lena sat on the bed's edge, pulling the boy into her arms. Dreams can feel very real, can't they? But you're safe here with us. Both of you. Tommy looked between them hopefully. Mason sat on the bed's other side. Both of us. As they tucked Tommy back in, the child's sleepy words stopped Mason cold. Is Lena going to leave like Mommy did? Before Mason could answer, his phone buzzed against the nightstand. The caller ID made his blood freeze. Richard Blackstone. Somehow, Lena's hiding place had been discovered. Have you ever had to completely reinvent yourself to escape a toxic situation? How did you find the courage to start over? Tell me in the comments. The call came at midnight. Not a wrong number, but a calculated message. Richard Blackstone had found his runaway wife, and Mason Cole was about to learn what happened when billionaires went to war over the same woman. Have you ever been woken up by the sound that changes everything? That ring that cuts through your sleep like a knife through silk? Mason's phone buzzed against his nightstand, the caller ID making his blood turn to ice water. Richard Blackstone. The name glowed in the darkness like a threat. Mason Cole. His voice came out steady, but his grip on the phone was anything but, the famous Mason Cole. Richard's voice poured through the speaker like poisoned honey. Smooth, cultured, and absolutely lethal. I hear you've hired my wife as help. How delightfully charitable of you. I do hope she's worth the trouble she brings. The words hit Mason like a physical blow. Down the hall, Lena slept peacefully beside Tommy, completely unaware that her worst nightmare had just found her address. Her breathing was soft and even, one arm draped protectively around the child who'd grown to love her in just 3 weeks. She looked so peaceful, so safe. She had no idea that safety was about to become a luxury she couldn't afford. Your ex-wife, Mason corrected, his voice dropping to the tone that made board members sweat. In my employee's personal life is none of your concern. Richard's laugh was like glass breaking in reverse, sharp pieces coming together to form something that could cut you. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, my friend. You see, Lena never finalized our divorce. Technically, she's still my wife, and she's been living under a false name, hiding my stepson from me. That's kidnapping, Mason. Federal charges. Prison time. The lie came so smoothly that for a heartbeat, Mason almost believed it. But he'd seen the divorce papers himself. Lena kept them in her purse like a talisman against the past. Richard was fishing, testing what Mason knew and how far he'd go to protect her. Cut the crap, Blackstone. What do you want? I want my family back, and I want you to stop interfering with what doesn't belong to you. Richard's voice turned cold as winter moonlight. Send her home, Mason, tonight or tomorrow morning. The Miami Herald runs a very interesting story about your new nanny's criminal past and your company's habit of harboring fugitives. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Mason looked toward the hallway where Lena slept, and something inside his chest cracked wide open. Not his heart, something deeper. Something that had been building since the first day she'd walked into his office wearing thrift store heels and quiet dignity. You made one mistake, Richard. Mason's voice was soft now, deadly soft. You think this is about her. But Richard Blackstone has been trying to destroy my company for 2 years. Lena didn't bring me trouble. She brought me a reason to end you. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. Careful, Mason. Some wars have casualties you can't afford to lose. The line went dead. Mason sat in the darkness for a long moment, phone still pressed to his ear. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Miami sprawled below him like a circuit board, all lights and connections and power flowing in patterns only he could see. But right now, all that power felt useless. He found Lena in the kitchen an hour later, making coffee with shaking hands. She'd heard the phone ring, seen his face when he walked out of his bedroom. Women who'd survived what she'd survived developed instincts that kept them alive. It was him, wasn't it? Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the coffee mug. Mason nodded. He knows you're here. Lena closed her eyes, and for a moment, she looked like she was falling inside herself. Then she straightened, and Mason saw something he'd never seen before. Not the quiet nanny, not the protective mother, but the woman who'd once commanded millions of dollars with a phone call. I have to go. She set down a mug with hands that no longer shook. Tonight, before he can hurt you or Tommy. Like hell you do. She looked up, surprised by the force in his voice. Lena. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, his hands framing her face. I've been investigating Richard for months as a potential business rival. You didn't bring me trouble. You brought me a weapon. Her breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying we don't run from men like Richard Blackstone. We destroy them. She collapsed against his chest, body shaking with fear and rage and something that might have been hope. I can't keep running, she whispered into his neck. I'm so tired of being afraid. His hands tangled in her hair as he tilted her face up. The kitchen light caught the tears on her cheeks, making them look like diamonds. Then don't run, he said against her lips. Fight. Their kiss tasted like tears and determination, and the beginning of a war that would change everything. What would you risk to protect someone who matters to you? Drop a comment below and tell me about a time you chose to fight instead of flee. But as dawn broke over Miami, Mason made 3 calls. One to his lawyer, one to his security team, and one to the private investigator who specialized in taking down men like Richard Blackstone. When he turned to tell Lena his plan, her bed was empty. On the pillow lay a note that made his heart stop. I won't let him destroy you too. She thought running would protect him. But Lena Carter had never dealt with a man who owned half the surveillance cameras in Miami and refused to lose what mattered most. Have you ever loved someone so much that their safety mattered more than your own happiness? That's exactly where Lena found herself at 6 a.m., stuffing clothes into a duffel bag while Jake slept in the next room, completely unaware that his world was about to change again. But she'd underestimated Mason Cole. By the time her taxi pulled away from the safe house she'd arranged, 3 black SUVs were already following at a distance. Mason's security chief, Marcus, had been tracking her phone since the moment she'd left the penthouse. Money couldn't buy love, but it could damn sure buy loyalty, and every security camera, traffic light, and cell tower in Miami. She's heading toward the airport, Marcus reported into his earpiece. Terminal C, American Airlines. Mason sat in the back of his Bentley, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Don't lose her. Miami became a chessboard with Lena as the queen piece everyone wanted to capture. Mason's black SUVs prowled the streets while Richard's lawyers filed injunctions, And somewhere in between, a woman who'd once commanded million-dollar deals fed her son cereal in a Motel 6. "Mommy, why did we leave Mason's house?" Jake's voice was small, confused. At 5 years old, he'd already moved more times than most adults. Stability was a foreign concept to him, but he'd started to believe in it during those 3 weeks in the penthouse. Lena's heart broke a little more. "Sometimes grown-ups have problems that kids shouldn't have to worry about, baby. We're going to be okay." But she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. 3 miles away, in his glass tower, Mason paced his office like a caged predator. Every instinct screamed at him to go get her, to use his money and power to drag her back to safety. But he'd seen what happened when men tried to control Lena Carter. She didn't respond to force. She responded to choice. His phone rang. "Marcus again." "She's not at the airport, boss." Change directions, heading toward downtown. Mason's blood chilled. Downtown meant Richard's territory. The Four Seasons where he always stayed. The law offices where his team worked. The private clubs where Miami's elite made deals that destroyed lives. "Find her," Mason told his head of security, his voice rough with fear he couldn't hide. "I don't care if you have to check every hotel, every safe house, every friend she might have. Richard Blackstone wants a war? He can have one, but not over her." The memory of their interrupted night drove his desperation. The way she'd felt in his arms, the trust in her eyes when she'd whispered his name. 3 weeks of watching her with Tommy, seeing her strength masked as gentleness, her intelligence disguised as simplicity. 3 weeks of falling for a woman who'd never asked him for anything except the chance to earn her own way. And now she was gone. Meanwhile, Lena sat in a coffee shop 6 blocks from Richard's hotel, staring at her phone. The text message had come 20 minutes ago. "Meet me at the Four Seasons. Come alone, or Mason Cole's reputation becomes tomorrow's headlines. You have 1 hour." She looked at Jake, coloring quietly at their table, and felt the familiar weight of impossible choices. Run, and Richard would destroy Mason. Stay and fight, and Richard would destroy them all. There had to be a third option. There always was, if you were smart enough to find it. Her phone rang. Sarah Martinez, her former colleague from the investment firm. The only person in Miami who knew the truth about her past and hadn't judged her for it. "Lena? Thank God. I saw the news about Richard being in town. Are you okay? I need a favor, Sarah." A big one. 20 minutes later, Sarah picked them up in her Honda Civic. Not the kind of car Richard's people would be watching for. Not the kind of woman Mason security would recognize. Sometimes the best hiding place was in plain sight. "Where are we going?" Jake asked from the back seat. Lena looked at her son in the rearview mirror. The child who'd made her strong enough to leave one powerful man and brave enough to love another. "We're going to end this, baby, once and for all. Have you ever made a sacrifice to protect someone, only to realize it hurt them more than helped? What would you do differently? Comment below and tell me about your fierce protective moments." Just as Lena's taxi pulled up to Miami International Airport, her phone rang. Jake's school principal's voice was shaky. "Mrs. Carter, there's been an incident." Men came asking about Jake. They had legal documents, and they mentioned his father. The taxi door slammed shut, but they weren't leaving Miami anymore. Richard Blackstone made one critical error. He threatened a child to get to his mother, not knowing that Mason Cole had been that child once, and some wounds never heal. Do you know what it feels like to realize that your worst nightmare has teeth? That's exactly where Lena found herself, sitting in a law office that smelled like expensive leather and broken dreams, while lawyers in $1,000 suits discussed her son like he was property to be divided. The emergency hearing had been scheduled for 2 p.m. Richard's legal team had moved fast. Restraining orders, emergency custody petitions, character assassinations typed up on letterhead that cost more per page than most people made in a day. Money, it turned out, could buy justice if you knew the right price. "Mrs. Blackstone," Richard's lead attorney began, his voice smooth as snake oil. "My client is concerned about his stepson's welfare. Evidence suggests you've been living under false pretenses, involving the child in your deception." Lena's jaw tightened. "My name is Carter. I legally changed it after the divorce. A divorce my client contests. There were irregularities in the paperwork. Technical issues that bring the validity into question. Lies. Every word was a lie, but lies told by expensive lawyers in marble courtrooms had a way of becoming truth if you couldn't afford to fight them. Mason sat behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his anger. He'd found her at Sarah's apartment 3 hours ago, not with relief, but with the kind of cold fury that moved mountains and toppled governments. "You should have trusted me," he'd said quietly. "I was trying to protect you by breaking my heart." The words had hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Now, watching Richard's performance across the courtroom, Mason felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart, something deeper. Something that remembered being 8 years old while his own father used custody hearings as weapons, while lawyers discussed his future like he was a stock option to be traded. The law office felt like a courtroom built for war. Richard in his $1,000 suit radiating cold confidence. Mason's barely controlled fury filling the space like smoke, and Lena between them like a queen choosing which king deserved her loyalty. "Your Honor," Richard's lawyer continued, "we have evidence that Mrs. Blackstone has been cohabitating with Mr. Cole, exposing the child to an unstable environment. We request immediate supervised visitation rights and a full custody evaluation." The judge looked tired. Family court judges always look tired. Too many broken families, too many children caught in the crossfire of adult wars. "Mrs. Carter, do you have representation?" Mason's lawyer stood. David Chun, representing Mrs. Carter, Your Honor. Richard's smile was cold and satisfied. He thought he was winning. He thought money and legal maneuvering would get him what he wanted: control over Lena, possession of Jake, the power to destroy anyone who stood in his way. He was wrong. "Your Honor," David Chin's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Before we proceed with custody discussions, I believe the court should be aware of certain federal investigations currently targeting Mr. Blackstone's financial activities." Richard went very still. "My client has been cooperating with federal authorities regarding irregularities in Mr. Blackstone's charitable foundation. Evidence suggests systematic fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of donor funds. Character fitness for custody should perhaps be evaluated in light of these pending criminal charges." The courtroom erupted. Richard's lawyers objected. The judge called for order. But Lena only had eyes for Mason, whose slight nod told her everything she needed to know. He'd kept his promise. He'd found a way to fight. During the recess, Richard cornered her in the hallway. Up close, he looked exactly like what he was, a predator in an expensive suit, used to getting what he wanted through intimidation and wealth. "This isn't over, Lena. Not by a long shot." Mason appeared beside her like a shadow made solid. "Actually, it is. The FBI has been building a case against you for 8 months. Lena's evidence just gave them everything they needed for an indictment." Richard's face went white. "You can't prove anything. Guide fraud, tax evasion, charity fraud. The evidence is overwhelming." Mason's voice was soft, deadly soft. "Funny thing about stealing from children's charities, Richard, juries tend to take that personally. You think you've won?" Richard's composure cracked, showing the monster underneath. "I'll destroy you both. I'll take everything you care about and burn it to the ground." That's when Mason smiled. Not the charming smile he used in boardrooms, but something colder. Something that remembered being a helpless child in a system that failed him. "You already tried." Mason's hand found Lena's, their fingers intertwining like they'd been made to fit together. "People who fight for me because they choose to, not because they're paid to." When was the last time you had someone stand up for you when it mattered most? Tell me in the comments about the people who've had your back when the world felt like it was falling apart. The judge's gavel came down with finality. Custody remains with the mother, with supervised visitation rights for the father pending resolution of ongoing federal investigations. But as they left the courthouse, Richard's smile was cold and satisfied. "This isn't over, Lena. Not by a long shot." His final card, it seemed, was yet to be played. The media painted her as a gold digger who traded one billionaire for another. But the woman facing cameras outside Mason's building had fire in her eyes and truth on her side. Have you ever watched your life become someone else's entertainment? That's exactly what happened to Lena Carter at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. When her phone started buzzing with calls from reporters, photographers camped outside Jake's school, and headlines that turned her survival story into scandal. Billionaire CEO's mystery nanny, ex-wife of rival tycoon living under false identity. The Miami Herald had run with Richard's narrative. Lena as the scheming woman who seduced one billionaire, then moved on to the next. The photos were unflattering. Candid shots of her looking tired, overwhelmed, caught off guard. They made her look guilty of something, even though the only thing she'd done wrong was fall in love with the wrong man twice. Well, once. Mason was proving to be very, very right. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation as Lena walked to the podium. No longer the woman in thrift store clothes, but someone who'd remembered exactly how powerful she could be when she stopped apologizing for her strength. Mason stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching her like she was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. And maybe she was. Maybe that's what happened when you watch someone you loved refuse to be broken by the world's worst intentions. Ladies and gentlemen, Lena began, her voice steady as stone. My name is Lena Carter, not Blackstone Carter. I legally changed it after my divorce was finalized 18 months ago. The reporters leaned forward like sharks scenting blood. You've heard Richard Blackstone's version of our story. Now let me tell you mine. She looked directly into the cameras, and Mason felt his chest tighten with pride and fear. Pride because she was magnificent, strong and brave, and absolutely unbreakable. Fear because he knew what it cost her to stand there, exposing herself to judgment from strangers who didn't know what it took to survive a man like Richard. I met Richard when I was 28 years old, a successful investment banker with my own clients and my own career. When we married, I was worth $12 million in my own right. When I left him, I walked away from a $40 million settlement because some prices are too high to pay. The room went quiet. This wasn't the narrative they'd expected. I chose to work as a nanny because children deserve love, not transactions. Because after years of marriage to a man who saw people as possessions, I wanted to do something that mattered. Something that couldn't be bought or sold or traded on a stock exchange. Mason watched the reporters' faces change. Skepticism giving way to something else. Interest. Belief. The truth had a weight that lies couldn't match. And I fell in love with Mason Cole, not because of his money, but because he saw my worth when I'd forgotten myself. Because he treated me like a partner, not a possession. Because when my ex-husband threatened our family, Mason didn't try to control me. He stood beside me and let me choose how to fight. A reporter raised her hand. But surely you must admit that the timing looks suspicious. What looks suspicious? Lena interrupted, her voice sharp as cut glass. Is a man who uses his wealth to stalk his ex-wife, who threatens a 5-year-old child to manipulate his mother, who steals from charities meant to help sick children. What looks suspicious is a media that's more interested in tearing down women than investigating the men who hurt them. The room erupted with questions, but Lena held up her hand. I have one more thing to say. To the women watching this, the ones trapped in relationships with men who use money as weapons, who make you believe you're worthless without them, who convince you that survival is the best you can hope for. You are worth more than what you can give someone else. You are worth more than your fear. And there are people who will see your strength even when you can't see it yourself. Mason's throat tightened. She was talking to the camera, but she was talking to him too. To the man who'd learned to value depth over surface beauty, partnership over possession. If this conference touched your heart, stay with me. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would give you the strength to stand up and speak your truth? What would make it worth the risk? As the press conference ended, as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed, Mason pulled Lena aside. There's something you need to know, he said quietly. Richard isn't just fighting for custody or revenge. My investigator found something. Financial records that prove he's been embezzling from his own foundation. This was never about you. It was about silencing the one person who might have seen the evidence. Her face went pale. What are you saying? I'm saying you didn't just escape from Richard Blackstone. You're the key to destroying him. She married a thief and never known it. But now Lena Carter held the key to destroying the man who tried to destroy her, and the choice would define who she really was. Have you ever held someone's entire future in your hands? Not their happiness, their freedom, their reputation, their ability to hurt other people? That's exactly where Lena found herself, standing in Mason's conference room, staring at documents that could either save her or damn her soul. The evidence spread across Mason's conference table like a map of betrayal. Bank records, forged documents, and charity funds diverted to offshore accounts. Each paper represented a child who didn't get medical care, a family who didn't get housing, dreams stolen to fund Richard's lifestyle. Jesus, Lena whispered, picking up a bank statement. The Children's Cancer Research Foundation. I remember this. I helped him organize the fundraising gala. We raised $8 million that night. Mason's investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, nodded grimly. According to these records, less than $2 million actually reached the charity. The rest went into shell companies, then into Richard's personal accounts. Lena's hand shook as she flipped through the pages. This donation, it's from the Hendersons. Their daughter had leukemia. They donated her entire college fund because they believed it would help other families like theirs. The room went quiet. Jake was at school, safely unaware that his mother was deciding whether to destroy the man who'd once claimed to love him, whether to choose justice or mercy, whether to become the kind of person who used pain as a weapon. I could destroy him, Lena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Make him pay for what he put me through. Mason's hand covered hers on the documents. You could, but is that who you want to be? She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. No, I want to be someone who protects other people from becoming me. This time when he touched her, it wasn't comfort or desperation, it was celebration. Celebration of her strength, her courage, her choice to fight rather than flee. They made love on the leather couch in his office, surrounded by evidence of Richard's crimes, and it felt like claiming territory, like marking their place in a world that had tried to tear them apart. You're magnificent, he whispered against her skin, and she believed him. For the first time in years, she believed she was worthy of worship instead of possession. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Lena stared at the ceiling and made her choice. I want to call the FBI, not for revenge for those families, for the children who didn't get the treatment they needed because Richard wanted a new yacht. Mason pressed his lips to her shoulder. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Even if it means Richard comes after us harder, even if the media gets worse, the legal battles get uglier. Especially then, she rolled over to face him, studying his face in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Why? Why are you willing to risk everything for me? Because you're not asking me to rescue you. You're asking me to stand beside you while you rescue yourself. The truth hit her like lightning, sudden, bright, and completely transforming. This wasn't about being saved. It wasn't about trading one powerful man for another. It was about choosing someone who saw her strength instead of her need, who celebrated her independence instead of trying to control it. I love you, she said, the words carrying weight they'd never held before. Not just present love, but future promise. I love you too, all of you. The fierce mother, the brilliant woman, the survivor who refuses to stay broken. When would you choose justice over revenge? What's the difference and why does it matter? Tell me in the comments about a time you had to decide between hurting someone back or helping others heal. As they prepared to turn the evidence over to federal investigators, Mason's security chief burst into the room. We have a problem, Marcus said, his face grim. Richard just filed an emergency custody order claiming Lena is an unfit mother involved with a man under federal investigation. He's not just coming for her anymore. He's coming for Jake, and he might win. The documents scattered as Lena jumped to her feet. What do you mean he might win? Marcus's expression was stone. He's claiming Mason is the one under investigation for fraud, that you're both criminals. The emergency hearing is in 2 hours, and if the judge believes him, he gets Jake. Lena finished, her voice hollow. Mason stood behind her, hands on her shoulders. Not if we get to the FBI first. Not if we tell our story before he can twist it. But as they raced toward the door, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that Richard's final card was about to be played. And this time, the stakes weren't just her freedom. They were her son. The courtroom would decide more than custody. It would determine if a woman who'd found her strength could keep the child who'd given her purpose and the man who'd shown her worth. The family court felt like a coliseum where modern gladiators wore suits instead of armor and fought with words instead of swords. But the stakes were just as deadly, a child's future hanging in the balance. Lena sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded carefully in her lap. She'd chosen a navy dress that said, "Responsible mother," without screaming trying too hard. Mason sat 3 rows behind her, close enough to offer support, but far enough to avoid Richard's lawyers claiming undue influence. Richard entered like he owned the building. His legal team looked expensive. The kind of lawyers who charged by the minute and never lost. They dressed him in a charcoal suit that made him look distinguished, trustworthy. The kind of man judges wanted to believe. "Your Honor," Richard's lead attorney began, "my client seeks emergency custody of his son Jacob due to concerns about the child's current living situation. Mrs. Carter has moved in with a man she's known for less than 6 months, subjecting the child to an unstable environment." Lena's lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. Mrs. Carter maintains her own residence. She has not moved in with anyone." The judge, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, looked unimpressed with both sides already. "Save the theatrics for your opening statements. I want facts, not spin." For 3 hours, they painted 2 different pictures of the same woman. Richard's team called her reckless, impulsive, a gold digger who jumped from one billionaire to another. Her team called her devoted, protective, a mother who'd sacrificed everything for her child's well-being. The character witnesses were a parade of contradictions. Richard's mother testified about Lena's erratic behavior during the divorce. Lena's former nanny testified about Jake's nightmares when he stayed with his father. Mason's housekeeper talked about Jake's laughter echoing through the penthouse. Richard's business partner mentioned Lena's history of deception. Then Jake's teacher took the stand. "In 20 years of teaching," Mrs. Rodriguez said, "I've seen how family stress affects children. When Jake started in my class 2 years ago, he was withdrawn, anxious. He jumped at loud noises. He hoarded snacks in his desk like he was afraid his next meal wouldn't come." Richard's lawyer interrupted. "Objection. The witness is not qualified to make psychological assessments." "Sustained," the judge said, but she was listening. Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "What I can tell you is what I've observed. In the past 6 months, Jake has become a different child. He participates in class. He makes friends. He talks about his future like he believes he'll have one. And when I ask him about home, his whole face lights up." During the lunch recess, Mason found Lena in the courthouse bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. "How are you holding up?" he asked, checking to make sure they were alone. "They're making me sound like a monster," she said, her voice cracking. "Like I'm some kind of criminal for falling in love." He pulled her into his arms, not caring who might see. The judge is smart. She can see through their act. Can she? Because Richard looks like the perfect father in there. Successful, stable, concerned. And I look like a woman who fought like hell to protect her son, Mason finished. Like someone who chose love over money. Like the strongest person I've ever met. The afternoon session brought the moment everyone was waiting for. The judge called for Jake's private interview. Just her, the court reporter, and a 5-year-old boy whose honesty could change everything. They waited in the hallway. Richard paced like a caged animal. Lena sat perfectly still, her hands gripping the bench until her knuckles went white. Mason wanted to touch her, comfort her, but the cameras were rolling. Everything they did would be analyzed. 45 minutes later, Jake emerged from the judge's chambers. He ran straight to Lena, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Mommy," he whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "I told her I want to stay with you and Mason. I told her Daddy scares me sometimes, but you make me feel safe." Richard's face went deadly calm. That was when Lena knew they were in real trouble. Richard at his most dangerous was Richard who'd lost control but hadn't given up the game. The judge returned to her bench. The courtroom fell silent. After careful consideration of all testimony in my interview with the minor child, I find that the current custody arrangement serves the child's best interests. Custody remains with the mother, with supervised visitation rights for the father pending resolution of ongoing federal investigations. Lena's knees nearly buckled with relief. But as they left the courthouse, Richard's smile was cold and satisfied. "This isn't over, Lena," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for the reporters to catch. Not by a long shot. His final card, it seemed, was yet to be played. Victory in court meant nothing if Richard Blackstone still held the power to destroy everything Lena and Mason were building. And his final move would test whether love really could conquer a man with nothing left to lose. The attack came at dawn. Mason's phone started ringing at 5:47 a.m. First his lawyer, then his PR team, then his head of security. By 6 a.m., he understood the scope of Richard's final assault. He's filed false SEC reports claiming insider trading, his lawyer explained over the phone. Backdated emails suggesting you used information from Lena about her ex-husband's companies. It's brilliant and completely fabricated, but it'll take months to prove. Mason sat on the edge of his bed, watching Lena sleep. She looked peaceful for the first time in weeks. He hated to wake her with this nightmare. "There's more," his lawyer continued. "He's leaked information about your sealed juvenile records to 3 different gossip blogs. Nothing specific enough to be sued for, but enough to plant seeds of doubt." The financial district buzzed with rumors as 2 empires prepared for their final battle. Mason's built on innovation and integrity. Richard's constructed from charm and calculated cruelty. Only one would survive intact. By noon, Mason's stock had dropped 12%. By 2 p.m., 2 major clients had called emergency meetings to reassess their partnerships. By 4 p.m., Lena was trending on social media with hashtags that made Mason's blood boil. "We fight back," Lena said, pacing his office like a general planning war. "We don't hide, we don't run, we fight. He's trying to destroy my company," Mason said. "Everything I've built gone? And for what? Because you chose me over him?" "No," Lena's voice was steel. "Because I chose myself. And that's something Richard will never understand." She was right. This was never about Mason. This was about a man who couldn't accept that someone had walked away from him and found something better. The FBI investigation into Richard's financial crimes had been moving slowly, carefully. But desperation makes men careless. By attacking Mason so publicly, Richard had drawn attention to connections he'd tried to keep hidden. Special Agent Maria Santos called that evening with news that changed everything. "We've been monitoring Richard's communications since the initial complaint," she explained. "Today's stock manipulation scheme? We recorded him orchestrating it. Market manipulation, securities fraud, conspiracy. We have enough to arrest him tonight." But Richard had one final card to play. The emergency custody motion hit their lawyers' desks at 9 p.m. Richard claimed new evidence of child endangerment. Photos of Jake at Mason's penthouse near the balcony, implying unsafe supervision. Screenshots of social media posts about their wild lifestyle. A sworn statement from a concerned nanny, claiming she'd witnessed inappropriate behavior. All lies, all carefully crafted, all designed to force one last desperate play. "He wants to meet," Mason's security chief reported. "Tomorrow, noon, at the marina. Says he has an offer that'll make all this go away." Lena looked at Mason across their kitchen table, where Jake sat doing homework, blissfully unaware that his world was being torn apart by adults and their games. "It's a trap," she said quietly. "I know," Mason replied. "But what choice do we have? If we don't show," he files the emergency motion. Jake gets pulled into protective custody while they investigate. "Could take weeks. Then we go," Lena said. "But we go prepared." The next morning, they drove to the marina in Mason's bulletproof Range Rover, FBI agents in unmarked cars trailing at a distance. The plan was simple. Let Richard talk. Let him confess. Let him hang himself with his own words. But when they arrived at the designated pier, Richard wasn't alone. He stood on the deck of his 80-foot yacht, Jake's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, beside him. Only it wasn't Mrs. Rodriguez. It was someone who looked like her from a distance, dressed in the same style clothes. "Lena," Richard called out cheerfully, as if they were meeting for brunch. "So good of you to come. I have something I think you'll want to see." He held up a tablet computer. On the screen, Jake sat in what looked like a classroom, but Lena could see it wasn't his real school. The boy looked confused, frightened. "Where is he?" Lena's voice carried across the water like a blade. "Safe," Richard smiled. "For now, but that depends entirely on your cooperation." Mason's hand moved toward his phone, but Richard shook his head. No police, no FBI, no recording devices. Just a simple conversation between former spouses about their son's future. The hunter had become the hunted, but Richard Blackstone wasn't finished hunting yet. 6 months ago, she was running from a man who tried to own her. Today, she was building something beautiful with a man who celebrated her independence. And the difference was everything. The penthouse had transformed from Mason's sterile trophy case into a real home. Jake's artwork covering the refrigerator, Lena's books scattered on tables, family photos replacing conquest photographs. Richard was in federal prison awaiting trial. The yacht confrontation had been his final mistake. Kidnapping Jake, threatening harm, all recorded by the FBI surveillance team. The boy had been found within hours, hidden in a rented warehouse by Richard's desperate associates. Prison, it turned out, was exactly where Richard belonged. But today wasn't about Richard. Today was about beginnings. "Mom, can we have pancakes?" Jake called from his bedroom, his voice carrying the easy happiness of a child who felt completely safe. "Already making them," Lena called back, flipping blueberry pancakes on the griddle Mason had bought specifically because Jake mentioned loving them. Mason emerged from his home office, phone pressed to his ear, but he smiled when he saw her. His company had not only survived Richard's attack, it had grown stronger. Clients appreciated transparency. Investors valued integrity. Sometimes doing the right thing was also good business. "The Johnson deal closed," he said, ending his call. $40 million in new contracts. "That's wonderful," Lena said, and meant it. 6 months ago, she would have felt uncomfortable with his success, like it somehow diminished her own. Now she understood that partnership meant celebrating each other's victories. Her own victories were mounting too. Carter Financial Consulting had opened with 3 clients, women-owned businesses that traditional banks wouldn't touch. Now she had 12 clients and a waiting list. Word traveled fast when someone actually understood what it meant to build something from nothing. "The Peterson restaurant wants to expand to 3 locations," she told Mason, sliding pancakes on plates. "I think we can make it happen." "We?" Mason raised an eyebrow. "She needs capital. You need good investments. I know her business, financing. Everybody wins." This was their new normal. Professional collaboration built on personal trust. Mason provided the resources, Lena provided the expertise, and together they were changing lives. Jake bounded into the kitchen wearing his favorite superhero pajamas, hair sticking up in directions that defied physics. "Mason, are you coming to my school play next week?" he asked, climbing onto his chair. "Wouldn't miss it," Mason said, ruffling the boy's hair. "What part are you playing again?" "A tree," Jake said seriously. "But I'm the most important tree because I'm the one the hero climbs to escape the dragon." Lena caught Mason's eye across the table. 6 months ago, Jake had been afraid to speak to adults. Now he held entire conversations about trees and heroes like his opinion mattered, because in this house, it did. After breakfast, while Jake watched cartoons, Mason pulled Lena onto the terrace overlooking Biscayne Bay. The Miami skyline stretched out before them, glass and steel reaching toward endless blue sky. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out an envelope. Inside were the keys to a downtown office building. Not just any building, but the one where she'd first interviewed for the nanny position. "You're buying me a building?" she asked, confused. "I'm buying us a building," he corrected. "Ground floor for your business, second floor for mine, third floor for the foundation we're starting together. The rest will rent to other small businesses that need a chance." The foundation had been her idea, helping families escape financial abuse, providing legal resources for women leaving dangerous marriages, offering business loans to people traditional banks ignored. Mason had listened to her outline the plan and simply asked, "How much do you need to get started?" "This is too much," she said, staring at the keys. "It's not enough," he replied. "You saved my nephew, saved me from becoming my father, saved yourself from disappearing forever. This is just a building. You're changing the world." That night, after Jake was asleep, they celebrated on their terrace under the stars. Miami twinkled below them like fallen constellations. But Lena only had eyes for the man who'd seen her worth when she'd forgotten herself. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, the words carrying new weight. Not just present love, but future promise. "I love you too," he replied, his hands gentle on her face. Ready to change the world together? She was ready for anything. The proposal wasn't just about marriage. It was about choosing to build a future together instead of just surviving the present. And some questions are worth asking even when you're scared of the answer. The Miami sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink as they sat on the penthouse terrace. Jake building Lego empires at their feet while his future parents decided on forever. "I have something to ask you," Mason said, his usual confidence wavering for the first time in months. Lena's hands stilled on her coffee cup. They talked about the future in careful, hypothetical terms. Someday, maybe if things worked out. But the velvet box in his palm made hypothetical suddenly very real. "I know we agreed to take things slow," he continued, his voice uncertain in a way that made her heart race. "But some things are worth rushing toward." Jake looked up from his Legos, sensing the shift in adult energy that children always notice first. "Are you going to marry my mom?" he asked with the blunt curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Because I already told my friend you were going to be my dad." Mason laughed, some of his nervousness disappearing. "Well, that depends on what your mom says." Lena stared at the ring, not massive like the rock Richard had given her, but perfect. A solitaire diamond that caught the light like captured starfire, set in a band that looked like it belonged on her hand. "Lena," Mason's voice dropped to that intimate tone he used when they were alone. "I'm not asking you to be my wife because I need you. I'm asking because I choose you every day, and I want to keep choosing you for the rest of my life." Her eyes filled with tears. "That's the first proposal I've ever received that felt like a celebration instead of contract." Richard's proposal had been about ownership, his ring, his name, his rules. Mason was offering partnership, equality, choice. "Is that a yes?" Jake demanded impatiently. "Because if you're going to be married, can we get a dog?" Lena laughed through her tears. "Yes to the marriage. We'll negotiate about the dog." The ring slid onto her finger like it had been waiting there all along. Not too tight, not too loose. Perfect, like everything else about Mason Cole's patience. That night, after Jake was asleep, they celebrated in their bedroom with the kind of passion that comes from knowing someone completely and choosing them anyway. "I love you," she whispered against his neck, tasting salt and happiness. "I love you too," he replied, his hands reverent on her skin. "My fiancée." The word sent shivers through her. Not Mason's woman, not Richard's ex-wife, but something entirely her own. A woman who'd chosen love over fear and found herself stronger for it. Planning the wedding became a family project. Jake insisted on being ring bearer and picking the cake flavor. Lena wanted something small, intimate, meaningful. Mason just wanted her happy. Beach ceremony, he suggested one morning over breakfast. Too cliché, Jake declared with the authority of someone who'd seen exactly one wedding movie. "What about the building?" "Our building." Lena looked at Mason. The office building had become more than just business space. It was the symbol of everything they were building together. Her consulting firm occupied the ground floor. His company had moved their Miami operations to the second floor, and the third floor housed their foundation. The rooftop, Mason said, understanding immediately. City views, sunset timing, just family and friends. "Perfect," Lena agreed. "Absolutely perfect." 2 weeks before the wedding, Richard's lawyer called with news that should have been devastating. Richard was claiming he'd been coerced into confessing, that the FBI evidence was inadmissible, that he deserved a new trial. "It could drag on for years," the lawyer explained. "Even if he doesn't win, the publicity alone." "Let him try," Lena said calmly. I'm not hiding anymore. She'd spent 2 years running from Richard's threats. She'd spent 5 months fighting his attacks. Now she was done giving him power over her happiness. Besides, she added, hand resting on her still flat stomach, we have more important things to focus on. Mason's eyes widened. Are you pregnant? She confirmed. About 6 weeks. The timing couldn't have been more perfect or more terrifying. A new baby, a new marriage, a new life built on the ashes of everything they'd survived. Our baby, Mason whispered, his hand covering hers. Their baby, their choice, their celebration of everything beautiful they created together. She'd once believed children were responsibilities that tied you down, until the day she realized that the right love doesn't trap you. It sets you free to become who you were always meant to be. The Miami Beach ceremony was small but perfect. Jake as ring bearer, Lena radiant in simple elegance. Mason's eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward their future. The sunset behind them painted everything in gold, like a promise of bright tomorrows. Their rooftop wedding had evolved into something more beautiful than either had imagined. The building that housed their businesses, their foundation, their shared dreams, now hosted their celebration of forever. 50 guests filled the space, not Miami's elite, but the people who mattered. Jake's teacher, the real one. Mason's nephew Tommy, finally smiling again. The women from Lena's first consulting clients, their businesses thriving because someone had believed in their dreams. FBI agent Santos, who'd become an unexpected friend. Even Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd brought homemade cookies because every wedding needs Abuela's touch. Do you, Lena Carter, take Mason Cole to be your husband, your partner, your chosen family? I do, Lena said, her voice carrying across the rooftop strong and sure. I choose you. I choose us. I choose this beautiful life we're building together. Jake clapped loudly from the front row, not caring about wedding etiquette. This was his family too. Chosen, celebrated, completely his own. The reception flowed around them like music, dancing under string lights. Toast that made everyone cry happy tears. Jake spinning in circles until he got dizzy and fell over laughing. But the most perfect moment came later, in the quiet of their honeymoon suite, when Mason's hands found a slight curve of her belly where their child grew. You're carrying our future, he whispered, and she knew he meant more than just the baby. She was carrying their dreams, their partnership, their proof that love could triumph over control. That choice was more powerful than fear. 9 months later, Isabella Cole arrived during a thunderstorm that shook the windows of Miami General. She was perfect. Mason's dark hair, Lena's stubborn chin, Jake's immediate and complete devotion. She's so tiny, Jake whispered, holding his sister with the careful reverence of a boy who understood precious things. You were this small once, Lena told him, watching Mason pace the hospital room with Isabella against his chest. Was I this loud? Jake asked as the baby began to cry. Louder, Mason said, earning a laugh from everyone. 6 months after Isabella's birth, they gathered again on their rooftop, not for a wedding this time, but for the grand opening of the Carter Cole Foundation's new headquarters. The foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams, helping over 300 families escape financial abuse in its first year. Lena stood at the podium, Isabella sleeping in Mason's arms while Jake played with building blocks at their feet and addressed the crowd of supporters, clients, and friends. A year ago, I thought survival was the best I could hope for, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. I thought keeping my head down and asking for nothing was strength. I thought independence meant being alone. She looked at Mason, at Jake, at the baby who represented everything beautiful they'd built together. But real strength isn't surviving in silence. It's speaking up, fighting back, building something better. Real independence isn't being alone. It's choosing who you want beside you for the journey. The applause was thunderous, but Lena only heard Isabella's contented sigh. Jake's proud, that's my mom, and Mason's whispered, I love you. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Mason and Lena sat on their terrace overlooking the city they'd conquered together. Any regrets? He asked, pulling her close. Only one, she said, snuggling into his warmth. What's that? I wish I could go back and tell the woman who walked into your office that day that she was about to find everything she never knew she wanted. She wouldn't have believed you, Mason said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. No, Lena agreed. She would have been too scared. But that's okay. Some gifts are worth waiting for. Below them, Miami glittered like scattered diamonds, but they weren't looking at the view worth millions anymore. They were looking at each other, at the family they'd chosen, at the life they'd built from broken pieces and fierce love. She hadn't found her happy ending, Lena realized. She'd found her happy beginning, and that made all the difference.